first, I want to acknowledge that the Whatcom Museum gathers on the traditional territory of the Lummi people and the Nooksack people who have lived in the Coast Salish region for time immemorial. The museum honors our relationship with all of our Coast Salish neighbors and our shared responsibilities to their homeland where we reside today. So again, welcome everyone to the Whatcom Museum's Collector Show and Tell. I am Chelsea Macias, museum educator. I want to run through some museum updates. The Whatcom Museum store is open from Wednesday to Sunday, 12 to 5 p.m. And we are now offering private gallery tours. So please check our Whatcom Museum website if you want to book a private tour. We have a couple programs in February. We've got the Washington State Northwest Regional Archives with Jeanette Gomes. This is through the Whatcom County Historical Society. And then we have on the 26th, this is actually supposed to be a 2 there. We have the North Cascades Audubon Society, Intro to Raptors of the Northwest Region. Alrighty, so we're gonna get into today's program. We've got 3 collectors, 3 expert collectors that will be talking on their collections. We will be doing a presenter, a Q&A, and then following the next presenter Q&A. And at the very end, we're gonna open up the floor to community members who have collections they'd like to share. So let's get right into it. Our first expert collector is Tim Bruce. Tim Bruce has 30 years of experience as a school administrator and has authored and administered over 50 million in federal, state, and private foundation grants centered on improving instruction and learning opportunities for all students. Currently, Tim is a director of educational leadership, and Tim's latest grant combined Western Washington Woodering College of Education and Huxley College of the Environment in collaboration with the Swinomish tribe and the La Conner and Concrete school districts to immerse K through 12 teachers and principals in learning about the since time immemorial curriculum. Tim also serves on our Whatcom Museum board, so we're really excited to have Tim there. Tim and his wife, Gail, who is a chair of the Skagit Valley College Counseling Department, live in La Conner, Washington, and among many found memories of living and working in Skagit and Whatcom counties. Tim and Gail are thankful for the friendship of many of the region's artists. Their collection consists of art created by these friends, so each work not only provides enjoyment on its own, it also holds memory to the artist who created it. So I'll turn this over to Tim.
Thanks, Chelsea. That was a really nice introduction. So just to give you a little bit of background, Gail and I have lived in the region almost our entire adult married lives. And what we collect is art from what would be considered the Northwest School. So we're fortunate enough to have works of art from Toby, Morris Graves, Guy Anderson, Sudakawa, James Washington, Leo Kenny, Joseph Goldberg, Alfredo Aragon, and John Schaefer, and Richard Gilkey and Philip McCracken. Our collection, for the most part, it didn't start off as a collection. I think, as Chelsea told you, all of these people, except for Toby, I'm not old enough to have known Toby, but all the others were friends of ours. And so as we collected, all of the pieces have a bigger or longer story underneath them. For the most part, though, our collection, we're heavy on Richard Gilkey and Philip McCracken. And Philip McCracken is my best friend, so obviously we have more of his than anybody else's. So anyway, the first piece that I wanted to share with you today, so each one of these, as I told you, has a story. It's Butcher Block Horse from Richard Gilkey from 1986. And if anybody knows the story of Richard Gilkey, a local Skagit man who for the most part was self-taught. Toby, Morris Graves, and some of the others really mentored him along the way. But he's probably best known for his landscapes of the Skagit Valley. This piece, though, Butcher Block Horse, was painted right after he and Janet Houston and another dealer in California, they were there for a show that he had mounted at a museum, and they were in a very bad car wreck. And Richard spent 3 months on his back in a body cast, and he painted this piece during that time. So he painted it lying on his back, and henceforth, I think, Butcher Block Horse. If you'll see, I think that's the way Richard probably felt, like he was constrained, like you see the horse. So next slide, Chelsea. So this is probably a little bit more what you're used to seeing from Richard. This is Ritual in Full Summer from 1973. It's a fairly large piece. I first saw this piece in a catalog from a show that it had been in, and I told Janet Houston, his representative, I said, "Where is that piece?" And she said, "Well, a family in Seattle owns it." And I said, "Well, if it ever comes on the market, let me know." And she said, "It's never going to come on the market." A week after that, I got a phone call that the family that owned it, the older couple, was going to move into a smaller condo where they could get some assisted living, and they wanted to find a new home for this piece. So while I was told that we would never be able to acquire it, we were, and we thoroughly enjoy it every day. I think it's important for everybody to know, it may sound kind of silly, but all of the pieces in our collection, I'm not sure we chose them. I think in many ways they've chosen us over time. So next, Chelsea. So this is, now we're going to get into Philip McCracken, and this first piece is called Pica. And I actually, Phil allowed me into his studio a lot of times. He was pretty careful about people coming into the studio because he was afraid that what they maybe said to him about a piece that was being developed might take the piece in a direction that he didn't intend for it to go. But I got to see Pica when it was just starting to emerge from the block of cedar that he was carving it from. And I also got to see the onyx eyes that were sitting there before they took their position in it. And I said to him, "When you get that done, I'd like to purchase it from you." So Pica, I got to see it when it was just a block of wood, and liked the idea. Gail and I have been hiking in Canada, and we'd seen a group of picas, and so we thought we had to have this piece. So that's Pica, and we enjoy it every day. It's in the entryway of our house. Next piece. This is also from Phil McCracken. Phil gave this to me on my birthday one year. It's a fairly early piece from '77, The Lesson. And I think if people do know Phil, or if they don't, Phil has an incredible sense of humor. And he first made this piece for his wife, Anne, and then Anne and he gave it, like I said, to me for my birthday, since I'm an educator. But if you notice here, this came in a series of what he called tableaus. And so he made families out of old paintbrushes, and this school scene with dried up lemons, the students, and the nice plump lemon, the teacher. And as he told me when he gave it to me, it ought to be the other way around. Next piece. So this is Plan A, Plan B. It's cedar and gold leaf from 2001. So when this piece emerged, it had been in Phil's studio. He'd been working on it on and off for about 2 years. But when it came out and went into the first show, it was right at the time when the Twin Towers had come down. So I think some people relate it to that, but it truly wasn't related to it. So plan A, plan B, you can see the charred bottom and the gold leaf on the top. So I was with Phil at a show in Seattle, and a lady came up to him that this piece was in and said, oh, I get it. The plan A is the gold part, and the plan B is the burned up part because it's charred. And he looked at her and he said, I don't know, is it? All right, next piece. So when I got asked to do this, I think Drew said to me, you know, and I'm showing you 5 pieces. I was supposed to just have one, but I couldn't do just one. You know, they all scream out to you that they want to be in the show. But he said, maybe your favorite piece. And talking about a favorite piece, you know, this is like talking about, you know, which one is your favorite child. But if I had to pick one, and I was really pushed, this would be my favorite piece, Willow Owl. I think it's very simple. It's extremely elegant. It's made of cedar, and it's also embedded with epoxy. So Chelsea, if you could show the close-up a little bit more. I think you can maybe get a little bit of the epoxy. There's actually some green and some red that runs throughout the perch that the owl is on. And what Phil did there is he carved out certain sections of this piece of cedar and then embedded it with colored epoxy. But so this is, you know, my favorite. I think it's because it is so absolutely simple, and I would call it elegant. And with that, that ends what I have to show you today. And I am open for questions at this point, I guess.
Hello, so now we can open it up to questions. Feel free if you have any questions for Tim to put it in the chat or the Q&A functions on your Zoom. Thank you, Tim. That was really awesome to hear all about each artwork that you have and those personal stories as well. That really added to why you collect. We have a question here from Chuck. How many total pieces do you have in your collection?
How many pieces of McCracken or how many overall?
We're looking at total.
Total. Oh, I hate to admit, there's probably 150 or maybe so. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, to the point where, you know, they don't all get a position on the wall or in the house. Some are in storage. Like a lot of people, it didn't start off to be a collection. It started off with one piece and a friendship. And the next thing I knew, we had the bug. And yeah.
I have a question myself. How long have you been collecting for?
Probably pretty seriously since about 1990.
We have a question here. Is there any reason behind what you collect in terms of sculpture versus painting / 2D, or any certain artist? Is there a reason behind that as well?
Well, as I told you, you know, for sculpture, probably 95% of it is Phil McCracken, and that's because of the strong friendship with him. I've also got Sudakawa. Recently picked up 2 or 3 sculptures from people who basically are learning from Phil or have, and so they've acquired some wood from Phil or, you know, to deal with, and so I picked up those pieces because I think they kind of have that same flavor and emulate in the same thing. There's a question in the chat about in terms of reasoning behind what you collect in terms of sculpture versus painting, I don't know. I guess, you know it when you see it, when you like it. And for the most part, I guess between Gail and I'm the more aggressive in the collecting, but she has things that she really likes. Like, for example, Alfredo Aragon. She has some pieces of his that she's specifically picked out. But most of the time, when we see a piece, unless I just buy it and then have to disclose that I've done it when I get home, we do it together and we tend to agree on that.
Alrighty, if we don't have any more questions, we will move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Toby Seim. Toby Seim is a mineral hunting enthusiast. Toby currently serves as the president for the Friends of Mineralogy Pacific Northwest chapter, and is the advocate of inspiring others to join in the hunt for minerals. Some of Toby's specimen has even been featured at the Whatcom Museum's exhibit, What Lies Beneath, Minerals of the Pacific Northwest. I'll turn it over to Toby now.
Thank you. So I'd like to start just by giving some input on Tim's collection. I think it was really interesting and neat, the stories behind his pieces that he collects. So, and there's some connectivity there with what I collect in minerals. There's always a story behind the stone. So it's really neat. As president of Friends of Mineralogy, I'm excited to be here and kind of promote the advancement of minerals, and really I'm hopeful that after seeing some of my collection that other people viewing this will say, hey, maybe I should collect some rocks. It's a lot of fun and sometimes very aesthetically pleasing. So very nice. If you go ahead and go to the first photo. Okay, so I collect rocks, rocks and gems. There's various ways that I acquire these. In some cases, I'll purchase them. Some cases, I'll trade. But for me, what means the most is actually going up into the mountains and finding the gems. I believe that it just makes it a little bit more special when you find them yourself. So as you can see from this photo, this was from a haul back, and you can see little glimpses of purple impurities in some of those crystals there. And so these quartz crystals with the purple impurities, that's basically iron staining that makes amethyst. So there's some fun things out here, and in Washington, I've learned that it's kind of different sections of land that provide different minerals. So I believe the coast used to be in Spokane, and during time, like a conveyor belt, different periods of land packed on. So you can find seashells in Spokane, but all those different sections of land that packed on provide different groups of minerals. So it's really exciting to collect stones here in Washington. Next photo. These are some dirty calcite pieces from Whatcom County here. As you can see, they come out dirty, and eventually we'll clean them up, and sometimes soaking in acid, sometimes leaving them dirty because they're natural and look beautiful. Next slide. This is another group of a crystal haul. And so originally, I used to go collect and bring everything home that I could find. And now as my collection grows and I'm finding more interesting things, I'm a little more selective with what I bring back. So those past 3 photos are just some examples of crystals and things that can be found. Next photo. Okay, so if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. In some cases, the minerals are in remote localities and they're hard to get to. So this is a photo of me in Idaho, climbing up to a crystal pocket had smoky quartz crystals. So it's kind of the process is really exciting. Bringing in the tools and going on these adventures. You never know what you'll find, and sometimes you can find some really great things. Next photo. The previous photo, I was climbing for things. In this photo, I'm digging for things, and these are pseudomorphs from the Snoqualmie area. And you'll see a clean one a little bit later in this slide presentation. But at that point, they look like just little dirty sticks, and then I'll end up taking them home and cleaning them and then displaying them. So next photo. Once again, sometimes it's difficult to get to where you want to go and to get to those mineral pockets. So here's an example of rappelling a cliffside to search for minerals. Next photo. This is that same area, and you can see my legs in there where the arrow's pointing. So yeah, I rappelled down, and that was actually a pocket of crystals that I could stand up in and reach and start chiseling them away. So the process is really adventurous and fun. Next photo. And sometimes you have to get creative with how you get to them. And in this case, we didn't have a ladder, we didn't have any rope, and we saw a big hole up in the rock face, and basically it took a power squat to get one of us up there and start collecting. So sometimes creativity works. Next photo. And this is just a funny photo, I thought. So this was collecting a pocket of giant smoky quartz crystals. Next photo. And that's what was in that hole. So these crystals will end up coming back home. I'll end up soaking them in some kind of acid, muriatic acid, and ensuring they look nice and pretty and presentable. And then from there, they'll either go into my collection, or I'll gift them away or sell them, depending on what I want to do with them. Next photo. This was one of my favorite finds. This was in the Peterson Mountain area on the border of Reno and Nevada and California. So a very nice smoky amethyst crystal, and it led to a lot of complications trying to bring it back through a flight home. Next photo. Currently, my collection is mostly in storage flats. I do have many displays up in my clubhouse and in my house. The real correct way of processing these are to clean them, make them presentable and catalog them. So that's my next step, is to take my collection and start cataloging them so I can know, where the pieces are and where they're from and how many I have. Next photo. This is an example of what one of the display cases look like. These are all Washington minerals here. Next photo. This one's really aesthetically pleasing. This is from the Snoqualmie area. It's quartz crystals with pyrite cubes. And so this one was in the Whatcom Museum at one point. It's just a really aesthetically pleasing combination. Next photo. So this is one of those brown sticks I was pulling out in a previous photo. This is a pseudomorph. So at one point it was some kind of crystal. We don't know what it was. And it was replaced by another mineral due to conditions. So it took the same form as the previous crystal. And then a later generation of quartz grew all along the outside. So it's really interesting and fun. And that's from the Snoqualmie area. Next photo. And this is what I typically do is I'll take my minerals and mount them on acrylic bases to make them presentable. And in this particular quartz crystal, I didn't clean it entirely all the way because I like the kind of rusty look. So it's all preference. I could have cleaned it and probably made it a all clear white crystals, but in this case, I like the way it looked. Next photo. This is a very, very, very tiny microscopic crystal of heulandite. It was found in the Mason County area. I just like the contrast. So I mounted it on a tile and put it into my collection. It's very neat. Next photo. And sometimes when you can't mount them on tiles, I end up using them as yard decoration. So here's a yard rock. It's a big cluster of crystals from the Snoqualmie area. I took that down maybe about 4 miles down the mountain. It was a heavy one. That and along with all of my camping gear, tents and everything. So it's a tricky process, but it's a lot of fun. So I think that's the last slide we have here. Once again, I'd like to encourage everyone to get out and find some rocks, whether it's out in the mountains or on the beach, finding agates. It's a lot of fun, and sometimes it just feels nice to have a pocket rock or some stones to look at and examine. So I think we'll go into questions now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. Those were some really awesome images of not only you collecting, but also of the actual stones themselves. We have a question here from Edward. What initially got you interested in minerals? We'll kind of break this question down because there's a few here.
Yeah. So that's a good one, because I found myself kind of stuck on social media and watching too much TV. So I decided hey, I'll start to go hiking. We have the mecca of hiking right here in the Pacific Northwest. So I started hiking, and really it didn't capture my attention. I'd go up on a hike, see the view. The view's beautiful, but really it didn't capture me. So then I remembered as a kid, I collected rocks. So I just thought, well, what do we have in this area. And so I started researching and went out and that's how it started.
Another part of this question is what percentage of your collection is from the Northwest?
I'd say 95%. And really sometimes I'm stubborn with my displays. If I have everything in a case that has been self-collected and from the Pacific Northwest, I don't like to see other minerals from India or from some other locality sneak into that case. So so yeah, it's mostly all local, at least to the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you. We've got another question here. If you're planning on an expedition to search for minerals, are you hoping to find something raw, new, or a better example of a mineral you already have?
Yeah, there's a lot of unexplored areas, especially here. But typically, I'm looking to find some rare growths, or yes, better examples of what I currently have. So if I do find a better example, then I'll take the other one off and put the other one on in the display, and most likely rehome the previous mineral. So yeah, it's to me, I like to kind of upgrade as I collect.
And I mentioned that some of your specimens have been in the Whatcom Museum in that exhibit. Is there any other locations or anywhere else that your specimen live or have been exhibited?
Well, I guess the best way to answer that is my group, Friends of Mineralogy. We're in very close contact with the Rice Museum in Oregon. It's a mineral museum, and so we frequently display minerals there and utilize them as an avenue to share minerals. But for me, most of my minerals are through photographs on Instagram or just in my collection in my house, at my house.
Thank you. We have a question here. How do you scope out specific areas to look for minerals, such as the steep areas you showed in those images?
Yeah, well, so typically many of the localities have already been kind of identified through the history of collectors. So if you start researching what kind of minerals are in your area, it'll point you to the direction, kind of the general area where you can find these minerals, and then it's mostly looking for patterns in the rock or kind of staining. Maybe you might see some iron staining, and that's a good indication of a mineralized area. So yeah, it takes a little practice. Sometimes I'll go out to go collecting and come back empty-handed, and other times I'll come with a whole backpack full. So regardless, it's an adventure and it's fun.
That must be a treacherous hike back with a backpack full of rocks.
Yeah, but when you have that, it keeps you moving.
Let's see if we don't have any other questions, I think we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much again, Toby.
Cool, thank you.
Alrighty, so our next presenter for today's program is Dave Smith. Dave Smith began his journey into the book business when, at the age of 14, he started working for a used bookstore in downtown Anaheim called The Book Sale in 1969. In 1979, he opened his first comic book store, Fantasy Illustrated, about 1.5 miles from Disneyland. Along the way, he opened 2 other locations in California, and in 1994, he moved to Washington State and brought the Rocket Comics in Seattle. He bought the Rocket Comics in Seattle. While retaining the fantasy illustrated name for his mail order business, in the late 1990s, he started specializing in pulp magazine and exhibiting at pulp conventions. In 2001, he closed his last brick and mortar store, moving full-time into mail order and shows. These days, he concentrates on pulp magazine with an ever-increasing emphasis on vintage science fiction books with some comics on the side. And let me turn it over to stop our share here and get Dave on.
It's not letting me get on. There we go. Thank you, Chelsea. Really appreciate you guys inviting me to be a part of this. As she said in the introduction, I started working for another bookstore in '69 and opened my own in '79 and went from there. Today, I'd like to give you a brief overview. Pulp 101 would like to do an introduction to pulps and what they are and how they play out. So this is a pulp magazine, and basically a pulp magazine is printed on cheap pulp paper, hence the name. It's about the size of a comic book, and although it's a lot thicker. This one runs about 190 pages. And basically, a quote I really like that sums up what pulps are all about is from a pulp writer named John Nanovic. We weren't selling art. We weren't even selling literature. We were selling excitement. We're selling dreams for the average American. And that's what pulps are about, was fiction for the average American. Pulps are cheap, a dime to 25 cents usually. So a lot cheaper than buying a hardback book back then. Now pulps existed in 3 different formats. We call this a regular format. And there's also what's called the bed sheet format, and that's a lot larger, as you can see. And a third format was called digest format. Now, digest started in the 40s and 50s. Regular from inception into the 50s, and the bed sheet was sporadic here and there, depending on the publisher and how they wanted to present things. Now, in the early days, pulps were standard adventure, and they'd be a mix of different type of fiction. You get some romance, a lot of westerns, you get exploration, things like that. They usually ran about 135,000 words in the beginning, and they'd have novels, novellas, poetry, and short stories. Usually the average pulp would have a novel or novella and a bunch of short stories. They didn't pay very little unless you were really good and really fast. There were some pulp authors out there that would crank out between 500,000 and 1 million words a year. Walter Gibson, who was the creator of The Shadow, was one of those guys. And another was Frederick Faust, who wrote under the name Maxwell Brant, or Max Brant. And he's considered to be the most prolific writer. In the early days, you had a lot of just general adventure, like the Argosy I showed you, adventure, blue book, short stories. And then the specialty pulp started. Now, the first specialty pulp was called Railroad Men's Stories. And that came out in October 1906. I don't have that one, but I do have a later issue after the name changed. And pretty much every cover had a train on it, or was in the rail yard, or had an engineer or something like that. And again, it was specific to railroad stories. The first aviation pulp was Air Stories. And Air Stories was put out by Fiction House, who was a big pulp publishing company. They also published a lot of comic books in the 40s and 50s. This is the first issue. It's August 1927. It ran 61 issues and ended in 1939. The following year, Fiction House also put out Wings, and it started in January 1928 and ran to 1953 for a total of 133 issues. So what I'm doing right now is just going through some of the genres and showing you some samples of them. This is a really important pulp. This is the first pulp devoted entirely to science fiction. Amazing Stories, April 1926. And it had a long run. In the 50s, in 1953, it converted to digest size and ran to March 2005, although it was revived later, but the original run went to 2005, which is pretty amazing. Amazing Stories also put out a very important pulp. This one is from August 1928, and it contains the very first appearance of Buck Rogers. Now, a lot of people think this is Buck. It's not. This is a character from a story called The Skylark of Space by E. Doc Smith. But you got the spaceman and the jetpack back here. So a lot of people just assume this is Buck. Either way, it's still a very iconic image, and it gets reprinted a lot. The first pulp devoted entirely to horror was Weird Tales. Weird Tales is a very important pulp. This is the first issue from March 1923, and it ran from 23 to 1954 for 279 issues. Many consider this to be the finest of the horror pulps. It had a lot of great stories in there. H.P. Lovecraft, Robert Howard, Robert Bloch, Ray Bradbury, list goes on and on. Very, very rare pulp, very hard to get. One of the competitors to Weird Tales was Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories went from July 26 to January 32 for a total of 64 issues. It's a scarce run. It's very hard to put together. There's probably very few complete sets around in private hands. A couple other important horror pulps. Terror Tales ran from September 34 to March 41. This is the first issue. They published 51 issues. This was by Popular Publications, and they also put out a companion title, Horror Stories, and this is the first issue from January 35 to April 41 for 41 issues. And for quite a while, they piggybacked months. They were both bi-monthly, so January would be one, February the other one. Another really important pulp, Black Mass #1. This is the first issue from April 1920. Black Mass ran from 1920 to 1951. It clocked in an incredible 340 issues. It's a very influential pulp. It's the birthplace of the hard-boiled detective story. It contained authors such as Raymond Chandler, Earl Stanley Gardner, and Dashiell Hammett. And one very important story that appeared in 1929 was the first appearance of the Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. Going back to Weird Tales, this is from December 1932, and it contains the very first appearance of Conan the Barbarian. We probably all know about Conan either from comics or the movies or comic strips and whatnot. They've even done action figures about him. He's a very robust property and has been reprinted many times. True first appearance, very high demand pulp. An issue of this auctioned for over $3,000 last year. This is the holy grail of pulps. Now you might know what this is by the cover. This is the very first appearance of Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's October 1912, and it has the distinction of auctioning for the highest price ever paid. Back in 2006, it went for $59,750. I would just imagine that if that particular issue auctioned again these days, it would probably break the $100,000 mark, and it'd be the first pulp to do so. Compared to comics, it's fairly inexpensive, but for pulps, that's pretty robust. I'd like to talk about science fiction a little bit more. This is Planet Stories, and this has the distinction of being the very first appearance of Philip K. Dick. And Philip K. Dick got a start here, and he did about roughly 120 short stories in the pulps and the digest. This is the September 52 issue and contains the story Beyond Lies the Woob. Now, if you're not real familiar with Philip K. Dick, let me show you a book he wrote. This is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And if that's still not familiar, I'm sure we all know the movie it was based on, which is Blade Runner. So Blade Runner came from this book. A sad story. This is what really put Philip K. Dick on the map, but he actually passed away before the movie came out in the theaters, although he was able to see about 20 minutes of footage at the studio at the invitation of Ridley Scott, the director. But he's highly collectible now, and one of the very highly thought of science fiction writers. Another really important writer is H.P. Lovecraft. He didn't begin in the pulps. He actually begun in fanzines and stuff like that. But most of his important work appeared in Weird Tales. He did a lot of Weird Tales issues. This particular one is a later issue from 1942, and it contains Herbert West's Reanimator. But he created a huge body of work, including something called the Cthulhu Mythos, a cosmic horror series that other writers have adapted to their own work. And at this point, I'd like to switch gears for my final segment and talk about the hero pulps. So there's a lot of hero pulps in the pulps. In fact, I'll show you real quick. This is a small publication all about hero pulps, and it has a list of, it's kind of glaring there, isn't it? But you can kind of see just page after page of just list of all the hero pulps, the dates, etc. Most important hero pulp was The Shadow. The Shadow started in April 1931 and around to 1949 for a total of 325 issues. It was written by Walter Gibson under the house name Maxwell Grant, and Walter wrote 282 of those issues. This was put out by Street and Smith. Another Street and Smith pulp that was pretty much number 2, Doc Savage. A lot of you probably have heard of him. There was a movie based on Doc Savage in the 1970s. It wasn't real good, but I hear rumors that they're working on another one, either a movie or a TV series on cable. So let's hope something good comes from that. This is the first issue, March 1933, went to 1949 for 181 published issues. A copy of this actually auctioned back in December for $23,000 almost. Now, a third important hero pulp is The Spider. The Spider was published by Popular Publications, and it's considered the number 3 hero pulp. It started in October 1933, finishing in December 1943 for 118 issues. R.T.M. Scott, you see his name there, wrote the first two. And then after that, a guy named Norval Page wrote most of them under the house name Grant Stockbridge. So between those three pulps, Shadow, Doc Savage, and Spider, you got a total of 624 issues. Most of it reprinted, all the Doc Savage, almost all the Shadows, and a good chunk of the Spider. So if you're interested in like wanting to discover what pulps are all about and starting to read some, that might be a great place to start. You can pick up cheap paperback reprints these days in the $5 to $10 range. And that'll be a great introduction for you. Two more pulps I want to share. Is one of my favorite hero pulps. It's Secret Agent X. A short run. It only went 41 issues from 1934 to 1939. It's about a guy who uses disguises to work his way through the underworld and catch criminals. Police don't like him, criminals don't like him, so he's getting it from both sides. So it makes for interesting drama in some of the stories. It's a very difficult run to put together, and I would have to say that I could probably put together a run of Spider quicker than this. They're just really hard to get. I think they had small print runs to begin with, and maybe not even real good distribution. My final pulp here is Jade and his Battle Aces, which is what I call a crossover title because it's about aviation and a hero pulp. And it had a really great, fantastic covers. It had a fantasy element to a lot of the stories. Vampire bats, weird creatures. There was a half tiger, half man on one of the covers climbing up this the plane fuselage. Now this went October 33 to June 44, and based in World War One. So you got some great covers of biplanes and such. Even when it went into publishing during World War II, it stayed in World War One. Now, the museum asked me, is my collection complete? And what do I need if not? Well, the collection will probably never be complete, but certain sections of it are. And one of the things I have completed is a complete run of Batman. And this is the first issue. It's real, not a reprint. That's from 1940. And I have the complete run from number 1 to 713, which closed out the first series in 2011. It would be nice to get the first appearance, which was Detective 27 a year before, but don't have that. However, there's one pulp I'd love to have. This is Zeppelin Stories. It's a very, very rare pulp, and I don't use the word rare lightly. It ran 4 issues. They're all hard to get. And this particular issue is June 1929. And the story is The Gorilla of the Gas Bags. Now, I'm thinking up here, maybe you got a mad scientist and he's sent his radio-controlled gorilla down the rope ladder to get the good guy, and the good guy's trying to get the scientist before he starts World War III, perhaps. Actually, it'd be World War II because this is 1929. So I'm just speculating. I haven't read it, but someday I hope to own it, and I'll read it then. So that's my my presentation for today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for the in-depth, Pulp 101. I really appreciated that. We already have a question here queued up. And again, participants, feel free to add your questions into the chat or the Q&A function. Our first question, Dave, I know it's like trying to choose among your children, like the previous presenter said, but what are your favorite pulps? Or if you have, do you have a favorite pulp?
I got complete runs of the 3 big one, hero pulps, Spider, Shadow, and Doc Savage. The first pulp I ever bought was the last issue of Doc Savage, which came out in 1949. and that's where I got started. I've always loved Doc Savage. I was reading Doc Savage in paperback in the 60s before I knew what a pulp was, but I would be reading this paperback and they would have a copyright date from 1938 or 1942. It's like, wow, this is weird. What does this mean? And once I started working at the book sale in 1969, I found out that they came from pulps. Um, so I collect a lot of the hero pulps. I collect a lot of science fiction. I got a near complete run of science fiction pulps and hero pulps. Beyond that, I just kind of cover pick and buy covers I like, and certain titles I've been able to put together runs of. Like I have a complete Terror Tales, complete Lone Ranger, which I want to talk about, but I had to keep things a little short. Lone Ranger went 8 issues, and that's a tough one to get. But yeah, I'm picking up pulps all the time, and it just kind of never ending, if you ask my wife.
Thank you. Since they were printed on, quote unquote, cheap paper, how rare is it to find copies that are in such good shape?
It's very difficult. Usually they're going to be in fair to VG. To find pulps from really fine to near mint condition is a rarity. There's been two pedigree collections come out. The Yakima collection, which I found in the city of Yakima, which contained about 12 to 1500 high grade white paper pulps. And there was another one called the Strasser collection, which came out, I believe, back east. And once in a while, you'll find some nice white paper, but usually they're going to be different degrees of tanning, anywhere from a cream to a dark tan. You don't want them too dark tan because that's when they start getting brittle, and you want to stay away from brittle stuff unless they're really rare. The All Story Tarzan I showed you, that's got darker paper, but it's so rare that I chose to buy it and keep it in the collection.
Thank you. Next question here. I had this similar question. What is the process like in finding a pulp for your collection to add in?
Well, in the old days when I had my own store, a lot of people would bring collections to me. I've been in the business for a long time, and people get to know me, and a lot of times people reach out to me. And I've had several people reach out to me the last couple of years. Last year was a great buying year. I've had people who were collectors that passed away, and their estate would get a hold of me, and I would buy their pulps from their estate. Nowadays, I do mail order and shows. I put out this catalog about a year and a half ago to celebrate my 50th anniversary, and it's mainly books and pulps. But on the back of it, I have my ad, and I try to get my ad out whenever and wherever I can. This ad appears in the pulp price guide that came out about a year ago. It's on the back of a catalog. I send this out whenever I sell a pulp mail order. They'll get a copy of the ad. And the main part of the ad is actively buying, actively selling. I put the buying first. It's more important. If I can get good stuff, it's easy to sell. So hopefully this helps in tracking down stuff.
Thank you. This is also a good question. Are there lower price pulps for beginners, or how do you recommend beginners go about?
Absolutely. There's a lot of lower price pulps. I don't mean to put you off by saying that every pulp is multi-thousand. I probably have 3,000 pulps out in my warehouse that I could sell you for $25 a piece or less. That Planet Storage I showed you, that's a great entry level. If you're into science fiction pulps, it ran 71 issues, low grade copies. You can buy a lot of it for $25 a piece or less. And yeah, there's a lot of inexpensive pulps out there. But since I only had a few minutes, I wanted to highlight, the better stuff today. But yes, absolutely. If you wanted to start collecting, you could reach out to me, or anyone. Yeah, there's a lot of them on eBay, and but you got to be careful on eBay. Sometimes people can overprice their stuff, so just be real careful. And people overuse the word rare on eBay. So be careful of that too.
Do you mind if I put your email in the chat function?
Go right ahead. Sure.
So if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to you. Okay. Another question, did the growing broadcast of radio serials affect the pulp fiction market, or did they help each other spread in popularity?
I think it was a symbiotic relationship. I think what killed the pulp market was TV. Pulp started to diminish in the late 40s, and by the mid 50s, they were either gone or they had switched over to the digest size, so that was a lot cheaper to print. So I think the serials, there was shadow serial, shadow movies back then. So yeah, I think that helped back in the 30s and early 40s. But again, once you get into the later years, I think TV killed them. And paper bikes. Paperwork were getting a lot more popular, and people would read a paper bike, a novel or novella, versus a pulp with a bunch of short stories. So the mindset of what to read and how to read it, I think, was changing a little bit also.
There's a question that asks if there's pulp fiction novels, and I think that kind of feeds into what you were saying there. Is there a difference between the pulp fiction that you were showing us and novels, actually?
Not really. A lot of the pulp fiction novels were first appeared in pulps, like pretty much almost everything that Edgar Rice Burroughs ever wrote, which you could buy on hardback or paperback now, first appeared in pulp magazines. John Carter of Mars first appeared in February 1912 All Story, a few months before the Tarzan. And virtually every novel he ever wrote, with a few exceptions, first appeared in pulps. So it's kind of synonymous. The two terms are interchangeable.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your collection. You have such a wide, I feel like, variety of different types of pulps. Yeah, they're really interesting. It was really awesome to see that first edition Batman as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So now I'm going to turn this over. The second portion here of our program is to open it up to our community. And we actually had one community member sent in an application for their collection. So we might be ending a little early today, but I want to turn the floor over to Denise and see what she submitted. I think let's get her started. Denise, are you okay to?
There we go. Should be okay.
Okay, let me put you on.
Okay.
There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I thoroughly enjoy the other presenters. My mother had an antique collectible business, and I grew up in that kind of peripherally, if you will, for many years. And so to hear everyone's enthusiasm for their collections was pretty exciting for me. So thank you. I collect Santa Clauses mostly from mid-century, because I'm from mid-century, and also glass Christmas ornaments that are also from the 1950s and 60s. A different collection I have is Star Wars, but that's another day. And they're vastly different. So I started collecting Santas just really with the first one that I got when I was 3 years old. And he's very similar to this one. This is not the guy. He's a little creepy. People think he's creepy, but I like him a lot. My parents got me a Santa that was about 20 inches tall, and he sat on the hearth for my entire childhood every Christmas. And so I still have him. We just recently moved into our new home, and I haven't found him yet in all of the various containers. But this guy is about the same age, and he's an actual music box that still works. don't know if you can hear that a little bit, but it's Silent Night. And so he's one of my favorites that I have in the collection. And I don't just collect the dolls, although I have a lot of them. This is my oldest Santa. He's very, very old and fragile. And you can tell he's even stranger looking than the other Santa. But I found him at an antique shop, and mostly where I find my old Santas are at estate sales and at antique shops. I don't generally purchase over the internet because I actually enjoy going out and finding them myself, being the detective, if you will. It's kind of the art of the hunt, if you will. The other thing that I have is I have a lot of these mugs that are from early 1950s. These were my parents. And another reason I love Santas, because we would have our eggnog or Tom and Jerry's when I got older out of these mugs. And so they're very precious to me. And I don't have any siblings, so I was able to get everything that they had. And I do have newer Santas. Some of them are behind me. Just kind of whatever I enjoy, I pick up as we go along. It was never my intention to collect Santas. It just happened. I'd see one that I liked and I would pick it up. I have a snow globe that's also very old. I believe it's from the 40s, 1940s. And I got this at an antique shop as well. So I just enjoy picking them up. When I travel with my girlfriends, we will often go into various shops and I'll find some items when I'm with them. I usually do very well when I'm with them. I have probably several hundred old ornaments from the 50s. I just picked a few of them that, and it doesn't matter to me if they're, have lost some of their paint or they're a little like diminished by light, because that gives them character as far as I'm concerned. So I guess I just really love Christmas, and it takes me back to my childhood. And I think that all of us have collections, if we collect at all, that are very personal to us and very reminiscent of things that make us happy or times that make us happy. And so that's really all that I have to say about my Santa and my mid-century glass ornament Christmas collection.
Thank you, Denise. That was really awesome. And thank you for bringing your Santas to this event. It was so cool to see just something that, anyone can collect too. But hearing those kind of personal stories and why that collection is so important to you as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm going to take 1 second here to share my screen again. This program was thought out and created in conjunction with our Anatomy of a Collection exhibit that's going on currently. So this is a display of the Whatcom Museum's collection at recent acquisitions and promised gifts. This program runs through March 21st. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this program, we are still, we now have availability for private tours, gallery tours. So please go onto our website if you want to check out Anatomy of a Collection. We've only got a few more weeks here, or over a month actually. So yes, thank you everyone. We're going to end a little early today. We didn't receive any other community participations. But thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. Thank you to all our presenters as well. You guys all did awesome, great. I loved hearing about every single collection and